You are now listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast with Brian Most and Don Davis.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Brian Most, SVP of Retail Strategy at NYSHEX and former VP of Supply Chain at Walmart.
And I'm Don Davis. I'm the Senior Vice President of Carrier Strategy here at NYSHEX and former executive of Hapag-Lloyd and CMA CGM.
And we're back again with our podcast, Supply Chain Secrets. I'm really excited about today's discussion because Don and I love to do shows that involve our current NYSHEX members. Today, we're lucky to have Mr. Jeremy Wells. He's the Director of Inbound Transportation for Clark's Associates. Now, for those of you that might not be familiar with Clark Associates, they started 50 years ago as an electrical service company with 2 partners and 7 employees. And now they've grown into a family of companies that employs more than 4,300 people in 17 states. And they were just recently named the #1 largest food service dealer by Food Service Equipment and Supplies magazine. Jeremy, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Brian. Appreciate you guys having me here.
Awesome. Well, let's just start with you. It'd be great to hear a little bit about your background and your journey. And for those that don't know about Clark Associates, maybe a little bit more about what they do and how they serve customers.
Yeah, of course. I don't have a lengthy professional background to share. Clark Associates has been the company that I've been with since graduating from Penn State in 2018. I started out with the company focused on our outbound transportation. So I worked analyzing our small parcel and LTL volume. An opportunity came up within the team to transition over and lead our inbound transportation department, which was newly formalized at the time. And so I've just had a great experience getting exposed to the world of container shipping. I feel like I've learned so much in a short period of time with all the experiences that we've had. I only got to spend 3 months really in the role before COVID hit. So it's pretty much been my entire role at the company. And to go a little bit more in depth about the company itself, so we're based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Our primary sales channel is the Webstaurant store. It's WEBSTAURANT store.com. And through that distribution channel, we have 340,000 products available, pretty much everything and anything that your local restaurant may need. So we're not necessarily a household brand name, but if you start going and talking to restaurant owners in your neighborhood, it's very likely that they've heard of us. So it's been a great journey, like you mentioned, getting to #1 in the food service equipment and supplies industry. And yeah, it's just been a great experience.
I tell you what, Don, you and I have been doing this for a while, and the last 2 years have been hard for you and I to get through, even with more than a couple of years of experience. Can you imagine being Jeremy and trying to manage through this kind of market? That's not an easy first job.
Yeah, that's one of the first things I thought of is poor Jeremy thinks like, oh my God, this is the most chaotic industry I've ever seen in my life. And really, for like the 25 years prior, it was pretty stable, and there was all this overcapacity and so on. And now it's like, oh man, what a time to start in the industry.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what that normal industry looks like, but it's been a great challenge for myself and my team to work through it.
Well, and let's start there, because I think there are a lot of challenges as it relates to supply chain. And can you talk a little bit about the challenges that your team is currently facing with the current market condition?
Yeah, there are certainly many challenges out there to work through. First and foremost, we're a very fast, high growth company. So even prior to COVID, our annual container count was growing in the 20 to 30% range. So we've always had this demand for needing more and more containers every single year. Prior to 2019, we worked entirely 100% NVO. And at the time, we were moving roughly 20,000 TEUs. So one thing that our team's been working on is trying to diversify our portfolio of contracts and build those relationships directly with the steamship lines to have access to that capacity. So that's definitely one of the main things we're working on. Additionally, of course, it's just a battle on a daily basis to get the capacity that you need. Our team has had to employ many creative solutions, take advantage of last minute opportunities, being willing to open up the checkbook in order to get that capacity that's needed to keep our business moving and keep our business running efficiently. We pride ourselves on having all of the inventory that is needed for a customer to run their own restaurant efficiently. And we pride ourselves on having it in all of our distribution centers so that you can get your products in 1 to 2 days. And that's, a very large and complicated supply chain to manage. And so that's a big focus of ours.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think, you touched on how you're a fast growing business, and that's got to be a real challenge when it comes to a market where there's such limited supply. I mean, how do you think about that in terms of your desire to grow, but you have this current market condition, which makes it tough?
Right. I mean, really, you can't say no to any opportunity that gets brought in front of you right now. You have to make decisions that in the past may have just seemed absolutely crazy. I mean, you talk about where the spot rates are going right now. I don't think anybody could have ever imagined anybody paying even $10, $15, $20,000 for a container to move Trans-Pacific eastbound, but we're doing it now. So, we have to say yes, or at least consider every single opportunity that's brought up to us. We need to work on, building relationships in the industry, talking to different carriers, talking to different forwarders, working with people like you guys at NYSHEX to help bridge the gap in capacity. You just can't leave any stone unturned to try and get all the necessary capacity to keep the business flowing.
Jeremy, you've said that obviously you've got to have a really open mind in terms of, what opportunities kind of come to you. And I'm sure, just kind of knowing and understanding the challenges of a lot of businesses through COVID, but the restaurant business was kind of front and center. You saw obviously, the restaurant business had shut down for a period of time. And then I think it was, a lot of, kind of pickup or delivery only. And then you could come back, but, only with a certain amount of people. And I guess when you think about serving your customers, over the last 18 to 24 months, is there anything that's changed in terms of the way they buy or shipping patterns, or what do you take away from kind of the pandemic so far?
Yeah, I mean, COVID induced a lot of volatility, and our company is in an interesting position because, like you mentioned, the restaurant industry was front and center at the beginning of COVID. You weren't going out to a sit-down restaurant anymore. But then on the flip side, the e-commerce industry was booming because it became a much more convenient way to shop. And then alternatively, we have every possible product that you would want for your restaurant. So, your flatware that you would use at a sit-down restaurant, that could be a category that's very negatively impacted, or that was very negatively impacted by COVID at the beginning of it. But then your takeout containers and your sanitation equipment, those types of products took off. So one thing that we had to kind of work through as a company is understanding that, you can look at the high level where our demand is going, but it was very important to look at each individual category and look at those disparate impacts. And as the situation has continued to develop, restaurants have started to open back up and potentially shut down again has happened, over these past 18 months. You just see wild variations in demand, and you see variations in demand to different states. So, the supply chain's not as clean as it was in the past in terms of having relatively predictable demand, but I don't think there's really anybody out there in the supply chain industry at all that has had a predictable past 18 months. So it's just something that you have to deal with in a position like this.
No, it makes sense. And I guess, when you think practically, maybe some of the real impacts, I'm sure there's been an impact on cost across the supply chain, maybe some added days of inventory because of disruptions and congestion. Can you just talk a little bit about some of those high level effects that, that have impacted your business at this point?
Yeah. I mean, Costs have certainly shot up across the supply chain. You look at all the impacts that have happened in importing over the past several years. You thought that tariffs were a big thing, and then you added on these ocean freight increases, these supply disruptions. It certainly has increased the cost of doing business. So we're definitely looking at a inflationary environment. There's no doubt that the prices of products have had to come up in order to meet the demand that we have. And that's just part of it. But in a supply chain where across all industries, there is scarcity. You hear about shortages of every single product. The best thing that we can offer to our customers is availability. So if we can get products on the shelves and ship them out to customers, we feel like we're doing a great job. So I'm fortunate to work for a company that has been able to recognize from the beginning how important it is to adjust to this market and realize that a $2,500 container is not a thing anymore. And so we've been proactive in understanding what do we have to pay to get the amount of product in that we want to receive. What does that mean we're going to have to do to adjust our pricing? And overall, we certainly could be in a better spot from an inventory perspective versus where we would prefer to be. But we feel good about the fact that we've been able to continue the business running and continue following the growth trajectory that we hope to follow as a company.
Yeah, I think you said a lot of interesting things there about, how the inventory demand has changed, right? That when there was a shutdown, it looked a lot different than it did before. And I can imagine that the data points have completely changed. So what it might have looked like in 2019 might have changed in 2020 with places reopening, different types of restrictions. It changes again in 2021. Can you talk about like the impact on a high level that all these challenges have had on your team and your business?
Yeah. I mean, it's very difficult in importing because there's so much lead time between the time that you order a product and the time that you receive the product. So I don't know how any company in a COVID environment can forecast everything perfectly, 6 months out in order to serve their customers in the way that they hope to. So we're doing our best to keep an eye on the trends of what categories are starting to rise, what categories are starting to fall. Because naturally something like a takeout container, if more people are now dining in versus taking out, then a product like that might start to lose sales. And then flatware, now that people are returning to the restaurants, might start to increase in sales. So you have to kind of make your best judgment in these COVID times of what's it going to look like 6 months down the road and try to anticipate those trends as best as you can. But really, it's impossible to do that perfectly.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think that it's remarkable what you've been able to do in this environment, and I think it sounds like your company is very adaptive and advocates of change. And I think one of the things that you have done this year is you took a different approach to your contracting. And for a lot of companies, change is hard. But can you talk about that journey, making that decision, and what that process has been like to look at contracting differently?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, our company, I think, is very forward in our thinking. So, change is not as hard at our company as it may be elsewhere. It's very not good if you say to someone as a Clark Associates employee, well, we're doing it this way because that's the way that we've always done it. That is very actively shunned. So we have no problem looking for new approaches. And like I mentioned, the main goal right now is to secure the necessary capacity to keep the business moving. And it became very clear even before COVID really had a massive impact that the culture of contracting in the ocean freight industry was broken. There's dead freight clauses within the contracts that you sign, but it's an agreement under the table that nobody's going to enforce them. And it's also kind of an agreement under the table that if spot rates move in a direction that's different from where that contracted rate is, that one party plans on defaulting. Obviously, in COVID times, as spot rates have shot up, we as the BCOs are the ones who are going to be struggling with the contracts because carriers have the incentive to not follow the contracts that they have signed. So with the learning lessons that we had in the 2019-2020 contracting season, and being aware of NYSHEX and what could be available within it, we thought that having the potential of having contracts where we actually knew that they were going to be fulfilled and there was a culture of actually following contracts that were signed, we believe that that was something that was going to be very valuable, especially this year. And it's also something that we feel is going to be very valuable heading into the future.
Jeremy, it's great that you work for a company that's supportive and encouraging of their teams to kind of go out and try and test and develop new approaches, especially right in a dynamic marketplace. And you highlighted obviously a lot of the impacts that are disrupting your supply chain, and of course you can read any of the headlines and you'll see the same thing. But now that you've kind of made this move to these committed or guaranteed contracts, how is kind of life before and after, or some of the things that you had hoped that these kind of contracts would would bring to your business? How has life been better with these agreements?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, NYSHEX brings that culture of compliance that you don't really get outside of it. So it's something that we want to continue to grow in the future, but it does give us assurance to know that the contracts that we do have through NYSHEX will be followed to a T. And so that's just very impactful on our business to know what you're going to get. If you're outside of NYSHEX and I have 1,000 containers that need moved, really the rational thing to do from a BCO perspective right now is to go tell the carriers that you have 2,000 containers that need to be moved, because that's what you're going to have to tell them in order to get those 1,000 containers that you want at the end of the day. And now I'm not advocating for that as an approach overall, but I think that's a common reaction in the marketplace to overestimate what you need in order to try and get what you want. And then as that ripple effect goes across the entire marketplace, you have a list of ocean carriers who think that they're going to get this many containers, but actually won't. So I just think that having those committed contracts brings honesty to the table, and also brings that transparency and knowledge that what you sign for is what you're going to get, regardless of what happens in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think that the carriers want that too, right? I think that one of the challenges is that if I'm a carrier and I'm going to move 100,000 containers in a week, I probably have to book 150,000 TEUs, knowing that there's going to be a fall down. But in a NYSHEX environment, that doesn't happen, right? That now there's commitments, so you can see people are really sticking to the numbers that they're going to deliver. But can you talk about, from your interaction with the carriers, what has it been like having a NYSHEX contract and your relationship with the carrier? Has that changed? What are your observations with having a NYSHEX contract and dealing with the carrier?
Yeah, of course. One benefit of having a NYSHEX deal, which I think is incredibly valuable, is to have that shared data. Because when it comes to measuring performance, you can measure it in different ways, or you can, fudge the data in some sort of ways, or make your own story for how you want it to be. But with NYSHEX, it's coming to an agreement that you're not going to decide what the performance is, or you're not going to measure the performance. I'm not going to measure the performance. A third party is going to do that. And then you can have that mutual conversation about, here's what the data shows, what's going on here. So it breeds that culture of compliance. I think for us and any carrier we work with through NYSHEX moving forward, it just increases the trust that you have with each other, reduces a lot of the skepticism of a contract that's not being fulfilled. And I just think that has great benefits for just our relationships and this industry moving forward.
Yeah, that's really great. And I think that there's always a concern, like how could this work? But it sounds like it's worked out pretty well. But from your side, were there any other fears or concerns that you had, like going into NYSHEX? And can you talk about what those concerns were and what's happened along the way?
Yeah, I think, naturally, when your previous option with these contracts is that each party has somewhat of a plan to default depending on where the spot rates go. By entering into a NYSHEX deal, you're eliminating that option. So there's always going to be the fear of, oh, well, maybe I sign a contract at this rate level and the spot rates move down, and now I'm going to be paying way more money for my containers than the market can support. So I think that's always going to be a fear when having that committed deal. Is it's locked and loaded. No matter what happens to the market, that's what you pay. And alternatively, I think given our experience outside of the platform, there's a little bit of skepticism of can a company actually really enforce these contracts to the point where the vast majority of the space is released on a weekly basis, because from our experiences, that was never how it worked. And it just feels like that's the norm in the industry. So I think there's definitely some skepticism. And, there's still work that we need to do, even within our NYSHEX contracts, to make sure that there is that culture of compliance and the communication flow is happening appropriately, so that the right people are getting the right bookings and following through with them. But those are kind of the main points of skepticism. But I think if you take the long-term view and you think of what would this look like over the course of 10 years, maybe 1 year you're paying too much, the next year you're paying too little. But over the course of the long run, assuming the contracts are priced efficiently, it's going to even out. And it reduces that administrative burden of figuring out what to do when there is, fall down in the contract.
You talk about, one of the benefits being reduced administrative burden, and, hopefully if there's less exceptions, obviously within the contract and the performance, then, there's time and things that are given back to you and the team to repurpose on other things like that. And, I think that it's important for other shippers out there to hear, right, from somebody like you, because again, I think they think sometimes it might be too good to be true. How could you get a carrier to move their full allotment of capacity committed to you at the prices that you negotiated, even if they were, negotiated 4 months or 6 months ago, and it's dramatically different than what the market rate is? Can you give any kind of perspective on how maybe the NYSHEX, agreements you have with carriers perform versus, your traditional? And you don't have to be specific with percentages by any means, but just can you give us a perspective of how, the NYSHEX contracts perform versus others?
Yeah. I mean, I think roughly at this point, your NYSHEX deals, you have that expectation of full compliance, essentially full compliance. There's the penalty component behind it. Nobody wants to be charging penalties or being charged penalties, and you want to avoid that. So in general, when you're planning out your full year and you look at your NYSHEX deal, your expectation should be that that's what you're going to get. With a non-NYSHEX deal, maybe you're only getting half of the capacity, for example. And so in a tight market like right now, if you lose out on half of your capacity that you were expecting, that means you need to go out and find it somewhere else. If you go out and call other freight forwarders right now and say you would like significant capacity, they're probably not going to have too much for you. But if there are any out there who do, feel free to give me a call. But that's a significant burden for our team to have to go out and source additional containers in places that we may not have expected. And we knew going into it that there is going to be some level of there was going to be a level of non-compliance. So you did have to plan for it. But regardless, there's not an abundance of extra containers out there waiting to be filled. And so whenever you need more capacity, you really have to grind for it.
And even if there is capacity to be found, it's probably at a much higher price than maybe what you would have originally estimated or negotiated. And that must be really tough too to forecast and plan. Right, from a landed cost perspective, obviously you have, buyers who are out trying to make purchases to, obviously provide products to restaurants at the lowest possible price. But, can you talk about the landed cost security component of it? I mean, obviously everybody talks about getting capacity, and yes, it's important, but if you can get it at what you've planned or estimated, what benefits, is that providing you internally?
Yeah, I mean, in a year like this where you have that significant gap between the spot rate market and the contracts, having that uncertainty and lower, or having that certainty in your landed cost and that lower cost is definitely beneficial. Like I mentioned, I think we've had to make some tough decisions this year about our pricing and trying to understand how can we make sure that these products can absorb some of these spot rate increases. So there is landed cost uncertainty, and landed costs continue to rise significantly due to these pressures on the spot market. And so it's just something that we have to react to quickly to make sure that we are pricing our products at a level where we can afford to do so with whatever crazy spot rate quote is coming up to us that day.
So, it sounds like you guys have really figured out how to manage this committed contract. And I think for a lot of shippers, it's something different. And I think that, on paper, it sounds easy. Okay, it's a committed contract. But when it comes down to it, you really have to give some thought on how you prioritize these committed contracts, because obviously there's penalties about it. If you were to talk to other shippers, what would you tell them about that journey, about as far as how you've learned and how that learning curve ramps up as you start on this and to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think with NYSHEX, it depends a lot on what percentage of your capacity is allocated to NYSHEX. If you have 10 to 20% of your containers, 10 to 20% of your forecasted containers allocated to a committed contract, I don't expect there to be too many issues. It shouldn't be too hard for yourself as a company to prioritize those 10 to 20% of containers to move on a committed deal. I think it's important as you consider growing your volume to take a look at your forecasting on a weekly level and make sure that with the ebbs and flows, you're still going to be able to meet that commitment on a week-to-week basis. Because carriers want to follow the traditional MQC divided by 52 model. Every time somebody tells me MQC divided by 52, I just shake my head, because that's just not reality. There's no customer out there that ships exactly 100 containers every single week. Nothing ever changes, regardless of your seasonality. So, when you're doing a committed deal, you do have to actually follow that MQC divided by 52. It's actually, more of a real thing. So you want to make sure that you commit to a level that you can support on a weekly basis. And then you can diversify with additional non-committed contracts or spot rate cargo for the rest of your portfolio.
And based on that learning, you obviously went into it and said, I'm going to take a certain percentage. I'm going to put this up much on NYSHEX. I feel comfortable with that. Would you say that today, if you could do it over again, would you do it differently? Would you say, you'd look at the percentages, having learned what you learned?
Yeah. Well, I'd say first and foremost, we were pushing for higher percentages of committed deals this contract season relative to what we were going for. I think there is still somewhat of a gap in the industry of carriers and customers being willing to commit to putting a large percentage of TPEB volume into the platform. So I wish I had more NYSHEX contracts, and did wish that I had more NYSHEX contracts heading into the season. I think really at this point, especially for you guys, it's about kind of selling it to the carriers and the BCOs of, this is a good idea for you for now and for moving forward, because we're certainly interested in having a significant portion of deals available via committed contracts. but obviously you guys don't have 100% of all carriers in the platform yet. And even some carriers in the platform may only be willing to do just exports or just short-term deals, et cetera. So I think it's really important to kind of get that adoption increased moving forward so that all customers out there are trying to come up with what percentage of their deals they'd like to have on committed contracts. And I know you guys have a significant growth story ahead of you guys, and that's what you guys are focused on every single day. But that's something that we're eager to see ourselves as well.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say, and speaking from the carrier side, because that's where I spend most of my time, that's where I spent most of my career. I think carriers are really looking at this and looking at how to do more. I think just like there's been learning for you, there's been learning for the carriers that this is something different. I think it's something the carriers want, and more than one carrier said, "Hey, we want to stick to our deals, but we want to make sure the shipper's there too." And through a NYSHEX contract, there's skin in the game. But I think that this adoption is happening. I think when you look at our growth numbers, the reason why we've been able to grow so much is because it's not just a win for one party; it's a win for both parties. And I think that's something I'm really excited about, is to see the change. The momentum of change is there. But again, some people change faster than others. Some companies are complicated or more conservative, so they may not do as much right away. But I think it's happening. And a lot of my conversations about, looking forward, we're going to do more, and we want to be different.
Yeah, I think the point, Jeremy, of just other shippers hearing the learnings and the process you've gone through, right? Because I think a lot are interested to be educated and create awareness around different contracting vehicles, but they're not quite sure, right? How to embrace them, how to apply them. And so, hearing from you saying, there's a diversified approach to my portfolio of carriers and capacity, and this is how I approach it. Or some shippers are thinking about very specifically, some of their cargo is a higher priority than others. And is there a way to apply committed contracts to my highest priority? Or can I maybe move something that's going air freight now to committed ocean if I could truly count on it? And so I think as people learn and hear more examples like yours, I think there's going to be a higher willingness on the shipper side to kind of embrace and try the new approach. And I think that's really hopefully where others hear, this discussion going, is if there is broader adoption, both on the shipper, carrier, and NVO side of these kind of agreements, I think a lot of that volatility that we've talked about starts to come out, right? People stop, overbooking, and people stop, doing all of the things they're doing that are inefficient, just to manage through the existing system to then get to something that's much more efficient and specific. And you can count on it, as you said, because both sides are incented to do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So at this point, I'd like to ask you, Jeremy, is there anything that you want to ask us? I mean, you've been in the industry, you're relatively new. I mean, relative to Bryan and I, at least, you're new to the industry. So, I mean, we've been around a long time. We're these old, shipping war dogs here. Is there anything that you'd like to know from us? This is your chance to be a podcaster, and go ahead and ask us a couple questions.
Yeah, so my main question is, I'm curious, kind of, for both of you throughout your careers, was there ever a time where you wished that something like NYSHEX existed? And did you have any thoughts of maybe starting something like that yourself?
Wow, that's such a great question. No, I would say I didn't think about starting something like this myself, and I'm very thankful that Gordon did, because I think it is helping change the industry. But absolutely, I think that when you're a carrier salesperson, I mean, it's tough. People think that they're always out on the golf course or at lunches and things like that. But I mean, a lot of times they're having to be the face of the company and deliver bad news and disappoint their customers. And it's not fun as a salesperson to go through that process. And I think having the ability to offer your customers a choice and say, you can go with a standard contract, sure, here it is, but here's something that we know is committed, and now the customer is going to deliver this, the company's going to stand behind it, is really fantastic. So I think for me, if I had this, I would have absolutely loved to give my customer that kind of a choice, because I think it's about creating options. It's about creating efficiency. And I can certainly see the value for many times in my life where, maybe things change. But again, with the contract structured the way they were, it wasn't punitive for really either party for that change.
Yeah, and I tell you, Jeremy, we had tried a number of different things in prior lives of mine. You always heard, hey, how do we put teeth into this contract? And you might try and get more specific on sub MQCs or weekly volumes or forecasting systems or what have you. And I can tell you the really difficult thing was the administration of it. And you had talked earlier about kind of this central place of data. It's kind of that one point of truth. And then, this neutral approach to how exceptions get dealt with, right? It's really difficult for one side or the other to kind of unilaterally make decisions and it feel fair. And so the idea of saying, I now have a neutral third party that manages the administration, houses the central repository of information. And now my relationship with the carrier is talking through, okay, an exception happened. How do we learn from it? How do we get to the root cause and how do we improve going forward together? That's where, unfortunately for us, the process typically kind of broke down. And so I would have loved to have had something like NYSHEX, while I was working as a BCO. But I'm certainly glad it's here now, and I'm glad that there are members like you that are, using the contract vehicles and helping us learn so we can get better in the future.
Great.
Any other questions, Jeremy? Anything you want to know from the old war shipping people?
Now, hold on, Don. You can speak for yourself on that.
I was just talking about me. I mean, person. Sorry, old guys from shipping. That's me.
I guess thinking about transitioning from your previous roles into NYSHEX, how did you kind of make that decision to be willing to make the jump and move more into a startup type of culture later in your careers?
Yeah. Why do old guys want to work at a startup? Is that what you're asking us?
I guess so.
It was the unlimited vacation. No, I think, it was a chance to do something different. I've been part of corporate structures before. I felt like it was a new type of challenge for me. It was interesting. And quite frankly, it was a bit scary because when I was interviewing, more than one person had said to me like, hey, are you ready to work at a startup? Are you going to be okay working at a startup? I'm like, I don't know what happens at a startup. And I understand now what they were talking about because there's not as much structure. You don't have all these departments that have these processes that are set up already. There's a lot of things that are just new to us, but it also gives you a chance to be nimble and dynamic. And, I had a sense of that startups were able to be more agile and move faster. And, I thought, hey, what the heck? Because, I'm at a point in my life where I can make that change. I mean, 10, 15 years from now, probably wouldn't be able to make that change. So I think if there was a time for me to do it, the time was now. And I have absolutely no regrets. It's been fantastic, a fun ride being here.
Yeah, Jeremy, it's the same for me. Personal and professional growth, right? First and foremost. I, like Don, had worked in large companies and certainly had a chance to do a lot of fun things, work with a lot of great people. But the idea of the new challenge, right, and trying to build a business and find something that helps, members, customers, or an industry, and that's the second point of making a positive impact. The ability for Don and I to share our experiences from the past as to what worked, what didn't, helping imagine what a new way forward is. And if there's a chance to help, obviously the industry as a whole, great. But if it's helping individual members, whether it's carriers or shippers, find a way to serve their customers better, that's exciting, right, to me. And I take a lot of pride and joy in doing that. So yeah, I've been able to do some of that, and I look forward to doing a lot more of it in the future.
Yeah, and if I could just add one other thing. I mean, I think there was the startup piece, which was interesting, but I think one of the main drivers for me is that I believe in NYSHEX. I believe in the mission. I believe in what we're trying to do. And maybe it was a little unfair because when I was at Hapag-Lloyd, I served on the NYSHEX board, so I understood a bit about what the company was trying to do. But the company had come a long way since from 2018 to 2020. So it was great to see how much progress they made, and I was excited to get on board and be part of that journey.
And then last question, in terms of kind of your internal discussions about how NYSHEX needs to grow as a company, what are some of the, I guess, maybe most pie in the sky ideas that you have come up with as ways that you could potentially revolutionize the ocean freight industry?
Wow. Do you want to take that one first, Bryan?
Yeah, I was going to say, Jeremy, believe it or not, like our mission is to be the exchange for all shipping. We think that this relationship between shippers and carriers with very clear expectations, incentives to do the right thing, and a neutral third party that manages the data and the administration can work really in any mode of transportation. Obviously, we've started in the ocean freight side of the business. There's a lot to do there, right? We still have plenty to learn and to explore, but there's no reason why you can't apply these same theories, approaches to guarantees and commitments to port drayage or intermodal or domestic truck or even air freight. And so I think that really there's limitless opportunity across all modes of transportation. And then the other thing is just trying to figure out how we create solutions that, again, make our members' lives easier, right? Through the technology. And so there's all kind of neat, cool things that we've put on a whiteboard that says if we could do this for our members, it would make their lives so much easier and give them confidence and predictability in their supply chain. That's something that could make a positive impact. And so yeah, those are some of the things that we're working on, and I think it could keep Don and I busy for quite some time.
Yeah, I think the thing that I think about when you ask that question is us getting involved in additional aspects of the contracting piece. And when I say that, I think about invoicing and payments. I think that for us because we're uniquely positioned because we're involved in the contract, so we know what the prices are. So to get involved in the payments flow and also reconciling other types of disputes. A lot of people have asked us, like, when are you going to get involved in detention demurrage? Because that's obviously been a pain point. And I think that, it's not a short-term mission by any respect, but I think there is a space there where we could create value. And I think there's other points along the way when I look at the contracting process where we can fit in, and the industry would benefit from having a third party step in and try and help both shippers and carriers solve some of these issues. Because I think the unique thing we bring to the table, and it's something I mentioned earlier, this is really a win-win for both parties. That carriers are excited about what we've been doing, shippers are excited about what we've been doing. So we're bringing this element of trust to the industry, and I think that can expand to other parts of the business where we can help other parties win together.
Great, thanks for answering those.
Well, Jeremy, nice job on playing podcaster. I'm sure the next time I'm out of the office, Don would be happy to have you be a sit-in on the shipper side to handle my duties. You could certainly do that, no problem. But more than anything, just thank you for your time. Thanks for coming on to the show. Thanks for sharing your journey and your perspective. And congratulations to you and Clark Associates for all the great work that you're doing, the continued growth, helping restaurants, get back on their feet, as we come out of this COVID situation. And thanks for helping us learn, within NYSHEX, and look forward to continuing to grow the partnership together.
All right. Thanks, Bryan and Don. Really appreciate it.
And I'd like to thank our listeners for listening to the show. Jeremy, it was a great show. A lot of fun having you on. And for those listening, don't forget, rate us, review us, wherever you see us on social media or wherever you download us, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find your podcasts. Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast network.